left to right. That's not a pattern in language. There are no left-right metaphors in English. So one way to address this is to look at people who, Mandarin speakers who do and don't write vertically. Mandarin is written many different ways. Traditionally, it's in vertical columns from right to left. More modern scripts are written just like English from left to right, horizontally. And so you can find folks who only ever read left to right. And when you look at those people, so take this sample and only look at the folks who say they only ever read left to right, never read vertically, they still show much more vertical pointing than do English speakers. I'll show the same thing. So writing direction certainly can affect these tasks, but it doesn't seem to be doing all the explaining here. Okay. When Mandarin speakers point along the sagittal plane, the front-back axis, we also see some interesting differences. So let's just get a show of hands. If I ask you, which of these is the frontier? Is it this year, next year, last year, 2 years from now, 2 years ago? Who thinks A? Who thinks B? Who thinks C? Who thinks D? Who thinks E? Okay. E didn't get a lot of responses. That is what frontier means in Mandarin. The frontier is 2 years ago, so in fact, the past is being put out in front in that metaphor. And in fact, when we look at when Mandarin speakers are pointing in this direction, about half the time they do put the future in front, like English speakers do. That's what English speakers do. But almost half the time they put the past in front, which is something English speakers never do. Okay, so in summary so far, English speakers tend to organize time horizontally from left to right. Mandarin speakers are more likely to organize time vertically than are English speakers, and they do it with the past being up. And Mandarin speakers are also more likely than English speakers to put the past in front. Now, there are further questions you could ask. This study only addresses some of the complaints I had. So it's a very explicit task. People know that they're being asked specifically to put things out in space. So what would happen if the task were more implicit? What would happen if the task didn't use linguistic stimuli? In this case, we're still saying today, tomorrow, yesterday, and so on. What would happen if the task didn't rely on conventional calendar time units, so it didn't rely on months of the year or days of the week, things like that? So we did a task like this. This is an adaptation of a snark paradigm. People see a picture. This is a midpoint in some events. So this is an apple halfway through being eaten. And right afterwards, you see a picture that's either a later time point, a more eaten apple, or an earlier time point, a less eaten apple. And people are asked to say whether the second picture is conceptually earlier or later than the first picture. And they have to do this as quickly as possible. So here are some examples. That would be earlier, later, and so on. And the way people make their responses is by pressing an earlier, later buttons, and the buttons are arranged either horizontally like this or vertically like this. That's the only manipulation. We tested a bunch of English and Mandarin speakers. They're all tested at Stanford in English, and there are a whole bunch of items. Here's what we find. English speakers are faster when the buttons are arranged horizontally. Mandarin speakers are faster when the buttons are arranged vertically. And in fact, this effect holds across all the different durations. So the items we had, some of them span seconds, some span minutes, some span years. And so here, from seconds to minutes to years, you see English speakers are consistently faster when the buttons are horizontal. Mandarin speakers are consistently faster when the buttons are vertical. And the fact that we get this even at the seconds interval suggests that it isn't something about calendar time necessarily, because that, seconds we don't represent on calendars typically. I'm going to skip this and come here. So English speakers tend to organize time horizontally from left to right. Mandarin speakers are more likely than English speakers to do it vertically, with earlier being up. Mandarin speakers are also more likely than English speakers to put the past in front. Now, an important question is what creates these differences? We've identified roughly 3 things that can One is the metaphors you have in language. So in our metaphor training studies, we find that if you train people to use different metaphors, they start thinking differently. The other is cultural artifacts like writing direction. So we find, for example, Hebrew speakers lay out time from right to left, English speakers from left to right. Writing direction definitely matters. And we also find influence of the prevailing spatial representations in a culture. So one culture we've tested are the Kuuk-Thaayorre, or an Aboriginal Australian community. They talk about space using absolute spatial reference, so everything is laid out in terms of north, south, east, west. When we ask them to do some of these time ordering tasks, they don't lay time out from left to right or right to left or anything like that. What they do is they lay it out from east to west. So if they're facing south, they'll do it from left to right. If they're facing north, they'll do it from right to left. If they're facing east, they'll have time coming toward them, and so on. Just another example of a way that you could lay out time. Another thing that can influence how you think about time. Another question is, what about bilinguals? What about when people speak two languages? Bilinguals, of course, are exposed to a mix of the two languages, and so their cognition, the prediction would be, their cognition should reflect that mix. And what factors affect that mix I think are still up for grabs. Some good old-fashioned candidates that I think could be proposed could be weighted by frequency of use of the two languages, or primacy, which language you learned first, recency, which language you've just been speaking, and so on. All of these factors might affect it. So, to conclude, time is very often in our minds, and the way we mentally construct this very popular entity is very closely guided by language and culture. I just want to thank everyone who helped with this work. Thank you.